And I am concerned that your eagerness, a childlike giddiness to carry out the president's revenge tour, you've shown yourself to be unserious in your statements before you were sworn in, and some after. You've shown yourself unfit to lead this important agency. Ma'am, you want to know who was targeted by a weaponized FBI? Me. Greater than you want to know how and why. You want to know what I'm doing to fix it. Greater than about that. Let me move on. Well, you should read the book because there's no enemies list on that book. There are people that clears throat. Greater than all right. Today, we're watching something that honestly reflects a much bigger tension in America than one politician versus one official. Congresswoman Madeleine Dean steps in sharply questioning Kash Patel about weaponization of federal institutions and political retaliation. Now here's what matters for Americans today. People across the country, from conservatives to independents to traditional Democrats, are carrying a strong distrust of federal power and a fear that any administration can use institutions against whoever they consider a threat. These hearings aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening in an era where Americans don't believe there's equal justice under law anymore. And history gives people a reason to feel this way. Let's watch this entire exchange, and then we'll break down what really drives this divide in the country right now. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Mang, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member DeLauro. And thank you, Mr. Patel, for your testimony and for being here today. I've been looking at the President's 120-word FBI budget request. The so-called skinny, I'll call it OMBEC request that states that, quote, "The undoing of the weaponization of the FBI is one of the administration's top priorities. The weaponization of the FBI, that is something that deeply concerns me. It should concern all of us. And yet, since taking office, President Trump has been in a revenge tour. He has targeted individuals, universities, law firms, with executive orders to cut them out or to make them come under his will. He has used ICE to disappear U.S. citizens without due process. And he's fully ignored a unanimous Supreme Court order, and then over the weekend wasn't sure if he was obligated to uphold the Constitution of the United States. In your book, your recent book, Government Gangsters, you include an appendix with a list of names that people have referred to as an enemies list. Now I know you will claim it's just an appendix, not an enemies list. So let's focus on how the President sees it, on what the President calls it. And you proudly display his quote on the front cover of your book. The President calls this a brilliant roadmap, a blueprint. And I have not even raised your storied children's book. The plot against the king. It concerns me how many people from this blueprint have been targeted with executive orders and FBI investigations. The FBI cannot be weaponized, and under your leadership, it has been nothing but a weapon alongside the President to go after the President's perceived opponents to stifle dissent and free speech. A few weeks ago, as we saw through a social media post that you quickly deleted, the FBI arrested a judge in Wisconsin for correctly asking ICE officials if they had a judicial warrant instead of an administrative warrant, which they did not have. Despite this judge following the law, on the morning of April the 25th, the FBI arrested the judge in an escalation of the weaponization of the FBI under your leadership. Let me be clear. A functioning democracy does not lock up judges. I am gravely concerned about the utter lack of independence of the FBI and its weaponization under your leadership. I am concerned that the President is using this book, your book, as a blueprint. As he has said, it's a blueprint for revenge. And I am concerned that your eagerness, a childlike giddiness to carry out the President's revenge tour, you've shown yourself to be unserious in your statements before you were sworn in and some after. You've shown yourself unfit to lead this important agency. I was an impeachment manager for President Trump's second impeachment. It was a sad, solemn duty. And so I wanted to ask you about that, Mr. Patel. As you and the President continue to weaponize and investigate his perceived enemies as you followed this blueprint. When can I, a former impeachment manager, expect the FBI at my door? Ma'am, you want to know who was targeted by a weaponized FBI? Me. You want to know how and why? You want to know what I'm doing to fix it? About that. Let me move on. Well, you should read the book because there's no enemies list on that book. There are people that violated their constitutional obligations and their duties to the American people. And they were rightly called out, and you should give that book to every one of your constituents so they can read about it. I won't be doing that. That's their loss. During your Senate confirmation hearings, you repeatedly denied having any involvement as a private citizen in the firing of FBI officials who engaged in the prosecution against January 6th insurrectionists, the violent rioters who beat and killed Capitol police officers and whom you referred to as political prisoners. Since then, multiple whistleblowers have come forward, and we know that you likely committed perjury. At the same hearing, you claimed you were not familiar with Stu Peters, an anti-Semitic Holocaustineer, despite the fact that you appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 separate times, 8 times. And you claimed not to recall. Mr. Patel, my second question is, should we worry more about your memory or your veracity? We should worry more about your lack of candor. You're accusing me of committing perjury. Tell the American people how I broke the law and committed a felony. Have the audacity to actually put the facts forward instead of lying for political banter, so you can have a 20-second donation hit. The answer is both. I believe that the greater than answer is you're failing, not me. Play my time. Go ahead. Mr. Patel, I believe that the members of the FBI, and I know many of them, many retired, 38,000 people, as you say, it's a little less than that now, deserve the very best. Deserve extraordinary independence, deserve freedom from the fears of being investigated, the freedom of coming forward to make sure they're doing their job. And I'll end with this, that I think it's interesting that in your proposal today, you find yourself at a gulf of difference between you and the president. I wonder how you will resolve that. Will you go to the president and say we need $11.2 billion, not what you cut out of here? You're asking for more than $1 billion than the president's request. Are you going to go to the president and straighten out that gulf? I'll do what I've always done and represent the American people, defend this country, and make sure the Constitution is always upheld and the FBI is never weaponized. Maybe you should do the same. So you agree with the president when he says he doesn't know if he should uphold his constitutional duty? If you want to just keep putting words in my mouth, the TV cameras are outside. I thank you. I yield back. Again, this is an unserious moment, sadly for the FBI. I yield back. More so for you, greater than Mr. is strong. So what stands out in this exchange is just the personal confrontation. It's the deeper question underneath. What happens to trust when Americans believe federal power is being used against political opponents instead of protecting constitutional rights? That's not a partisan issue. That's a national one. Dean goes after Patel over accusations of weaponization, revenge politics, and executive branch targeting of perceived enemies. Patel pushes back by turning the accusation around and saying he was the one targeted. This dynamic isn't new. In American history, political factions have accused each other of abusing federal power going back to the Nixon era. And honestly, even further if you look at Hoover's FBI in the mid-century. So none of this emerges out of thin air. It grows out of a long history of distrust and documented abuses that shape how Americans interpret moments like this. Dean brings up Trump's executive actions and Patel's own writings. Whether someone supports or opposes Trump, Americans remember something real. Presidential administrations across parties have used intelligence agencies to advance political goals at different times. The left remembers COINTELPRO. Conservatives remember IRS targeting controversies. Independents watch the post-9/11 era expand executive surveillance power that affected everybody. So when Dean talks about weaponization, Americans hear something they already believe based on experience, not just rhetoric. Now Patel's response that he's trying to reverse weaponization speaks to another American concern. People feel like the system flips back and forth depending on whose team controls power. It creates a sense that law enforcement isn't independent, it's reactive. And that perception destroys public faith. What's happening right now in America is a deepening belief that federal institutions don't answer to the Constitution. They answer to whoever holds the seat. If Americans truly believe there is political policing, that's a national crisis of legitimacy. Trust is not a partisan metric. Once trust collapses, the Constitution itself becomes a debate instead of a foundation. People watching this hearing aren't just seeing Dean versus Patel. They're seeing decades of fear about federal overreach. Americans are exhausted with politics weaponizing institutions, whether it's against protesters, parents, journalists, or political figures. This hearing becomes symbolic because both sides are accusing the other of doing exactly the thing they claim to be fixing. And that more than anything makes the public feel like no matter who runs Washington, the system serves power rather than the American people. That's why this moment resonates, because Americans are tired of being told agencies are independent while every administration treats them like political tools. And if the United States ever wants to rebuild national unity, the federal government has to restore a sense of fairness that Americans haven't felt in decades. Here's what I'm really thinking. Americans keep going in a direction where half the country believes federal agencies are being used against political opponents. That belief destroys the foundation of a constitutional republic. If trust collapses, accountability collapses, and then the whole idea of equal protection becomes a theory instead of a reality. So I want to hear your take on this. Do you believe federal institutions are being used for political purposes, or do you think each side is exaggerating to score points? And more importantly, how do we actually fix trust once Americans stop believing the government is acting for the people? Let's talk about this below.